Hello and welcome to a new episode of the West Asia Post with me, Ghadi Francis, our weekly show where we bring you your weekly dose of stories coming out of West Asia, one of the most turbulent regions of the world. Today we bring you to the heart of Beirut, where we are standing right now. Just about 2 months ago, this city was rocked with a massive blast. It was one of the largest explosions that the world had witnessed, and it was the largest explosion that Beirut has ever witnessed. It couldn't have come at a worse timing for Lebanon. This was only the tipping point for a country on the verge of collapse. Before we tell you more, here's a look at how the country's sectarian politics has now put its one and only lifeline at risk. On August 4, 2020, a warehouse in the port of Beirut caught fire. The fire spread and led to this. A massive explosion that rocked the city of Beirut. But the blast was only a tipping point for a city on the verge of collapse. Almost 2 months after the blast, Lebanon's politics has seen no major change, and this puts its only lifeline at risk. Lebanon was once ruled by France. The former colonial power has always enjoyed friendly relations with the country. But now the country's sectarian politics has put this lifeline at risk. Lebanon descended into further chaos after the resignation of Prime Minister-designate Mustafa Adib. Adib was picked on August 31st to deliver the country from the chaos it was caught in. After an intervention by French President Emmanuel Macron, under the French roadmap, the new government would tackle corruption and fix an economy crushed by massive debts. But the deadlock over demands by Lebanon's Shiite groups Amal and Hezbollah and the inability to deliver Beirut out of crisis meant that Adib's rise to power was short-lived. Adib's resignation was a blow to Macron's hopes for Lebanon. And he did not mince his words, even taking a swipe at Hezbollah.
What happened these past hours, these past days, is a fundamental clarification. The Lebanese political forces, their leaders, the leaders of Lebanese institutions did not want, clearly, resolutely, explicitly, did not want to respect the commitments made to France and the international community. They decided, and I am obliged to make a cruel observation for all of us, 1 month later, they decided to betray this commitment.
Describing the events of the last few days as betrayal, the French president gave the country's political leaders a deadline, holding off sanctions for now. But Macron's continuous intervention does not sit well with everyone in Lebanon. Hezbollah hit out at the French president, saying that he cannot act like the country's ruler. While the Shiite group remains ready for dialogue under the French roadmap to pull the nation out of financial crisis, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah asked the French leader to review what he called patronizing behavior.
We welcomed President Macron when he visited Lebanon, and we welcomed the French initiative. We welcomed the President Macron when he visited Lebanon, and we welcomed the French initiative, but not him acting as Attorney General, investigator, judge and ruler of Lebanon.
Long before the explosion, Lebanon's economy was in deep crisis. Poverty and unemployment were on the rise. Protesters took the streets of Lebanon calling for justice. And for the past several years, the country has been sliding into an economic depression. Our exclusive ground report from Lebanon tells you more about this. In Lebanon, this has become routine. This is the new norm. Banks use security forces now to make sure no blood is shed and their money is safe. It's a historical Ponzi scheme, said the French president. And it sure seems like one, given the prevalent conditions in Lebanon. If you are a Lebanese citizen with your life savings in a Lebanese bank, you are not entitled to your money in dollars. You are not entitled to use your cards outside of Lebanon. And what awaits you is a long line and wait, and the entitlement would not be more than $200 worth of Lebanese pounds. If your requirement is more, you have to bring in the legal papers to prove that you have an extraordinary reason to withdraw your own money. It gets worse. The Lebanese pound has three prices. The old price, $1,500 for $1, the bank price, $3,900 for $1, and the market price that fluctuates to reach $8,500 for $1. This is a simple articulation of the crisis. Here in Beirut, it's the story of who came first, the egg or the chicken, the political unrest or the economic collapse. It is a complicated issue that has been first described by the financial expert Dan Azzi years ago in numerous articles.
The problem in a nutshell in Lebanon is the negative balance of payment. It's a balance of payment deficit of dollars flowing out of the country because we are not an exporting country. We're primarily an importing country. So because of the lira peg, the peg to the lira at 1,500, this allowed the typical Lebanese person to have a purchasing power much higher than the productivity of the country. In the old days, this balance of payment deficit was covered through remittances, foreign direct investment, tourism, and all that reduced. At the same time, our standard of living, the GDP grew, which meant our import levels grew to the extent that it was no longer sustainable. So what the central bank did was a series of what he called financial engineering transactions, paying a humongous amount of interest to attract dollars into the country, except that these dollars were being spent not in anything productive, not in an investment, but they were being spent on funding imports or the lira peg. So effectively what the banks ran was a Ponzi scheme by paying old depositors through attracting new depositors. That's essentially a nutshell. So when the money ran out, essentially, so today we only have less than $20 billion of real dollars against a claim by depositors of about $120 billion. So everybody now is competing for those scarce dollars, the depositors as well as importers to run the electric grid, to buy medicine, to buy food. Everybody's competing for the same dollar.
Warlords, cartels and banks have been monitoring the lives of Lebanese people for years, but it all escalated exactly a year ago when the Lebanese uprising started. There was nothing to hide behind anymore.
Let me speak philosophically. In life there are problems that are virtual, man-made problems, and there are problems that are real. For example, the explosion that happened in the port, that's a real problem. Real people died, real people got wounded, houses were destroyed, businesses were destroyed. That's a real problem. The banking sector problem is virtual. It's fake money. It's a man-made construction. So the good news is that 95% of the problem in Lebanon is virtual, meaning that, and virtual problems have a virtual solution. You can solve it on a board. The correct solution is to take the losses. Wipe out all the claims, a significant chunk of the claims which are debt. Mostly it's internal debt, by the way. Again, that's good news. So the good news also is that most of these claims are actually by a very small number of people. 6,000 depositors have more than 50% of the deposits at $1.90 billion.
So if these 6,000 depositors take the loss, Lebanon would be saved?
Lebanon will reach a floor below which it will not sink. So that means we can rise up from there slowly.
Some people await the US elections hoping for an American-Iranian agreement that would result in a truce and thus political stability. But truth be told, if the 6,000 rich people who got richer using the flawed system did not sacrifice, children's milk, patients' medicine, and the whole population will have to pay the price.